This file is very sensitive. We'll talk about this later on in the course, but sensitive file, okay? So when we're looking at it, I ran that command specifically as the root user. As the root user, I'm able to see, okay, this file now. Why, or what's going on here? Well, we're running that specific command, right? And we're still staying as Kali. We're doing this in a kind of one-off scenario. So there will be times where something that you run in this course might require sudo, or you can run the command without sudo, but you notice something doesn't work. So best practice for this is saying, hey, let's go ahead and just run mostly everything that I'm showing you command-wise in this course. That's not best practice overall. Usually you should run things just as a regular user. If you get permissions blocked, then run it as sudo as necessary. Now, the other thing to point out, and we'll talk about this again later on in the course, but why can we do this is because this user is part of what's called a sudoers file, meaning we can have this permission. Not any user can come in here. Say we made a new user and we just called the user John. We can't just take John and just go ahead and just run these commands as root. No, John has to have the permission to do this. So you can think of Kali as being an administrator, but only when we utilize that access or that privilege. Okay, the other thing I want to show you though is that we can switch over to root if we want to. We can come in here and we can say sudo switch user dash, just like that. And that'll put us into root. Now you can see, okay, we're running root at Kali. And that's only for this instance. You can, if you want, I'm not going to demonstrate how to do this, but you can, if you want, change the root password, log out, and log back in as root, and run through this course as root. Again, that's not best security practice, but that feature is available to you if you are a Linux user that is comfortable with Linux, comfortable with running as root, and you want the easy path. Otherwise, I highly recommend just staying as Kali, running as sudo privileges as you need it, and then moving forward. But this is a quick way to switch into root if you need to. Sometimes even running sudo causes some issues, so switching to root to run a command is okay. What we can do here too is a demonstration is we can go file new tab and look at a new instance, and you'll see that this instance of root is only good for this tab here. Once we start a new tab, we're going to be brought back right back to Kali. You can see that from the top line in the tab as well. So just keep note of this when you're running commands in this course. If you see something, again, try running it with sudo if it's not working, or if it says access denied, then you know, hey, I need to run sudo. Very, very, very important. Okay, I'm trying to drive that into your brains right now. So from here, we're going to move on. We're going to start looking at how to navigate around the file system, taking a look at everything from a bigger picture and diving into terminal. So I will see you over in the next video. Okay, so now our first lesson in Linux terminology is going to be navigating the file system. So if you're a Windows user, you're used to navigating your file system probably through folders, through a GUI, so a graphical user interface. Well, in Linux, we can do that, but the majority of the time we're going to live in this terminal here. So we really need to know how to get around. So the first thing we can do here is we can say, hey, where are we at? And that's PWD. So that stands for present working directory. So you type that in, you hit enter, and it says, okay, we're in the root folder. So we know that we're in the root folder, but how do we get out of the root folder? We can use a command called cd, and that stands for change directory. So if we want to change directory backwards, we just type in 2 dots here. And now we can say, okay, where are we at? So we're in a slash. So we're just in a home folder here, or just our generic slash folder, right? So what we can do is, well, how do we know, can we go backwards from here? Let's keep trying. So we do pwd again. No, we can't. This is our base folder, right? So you have to think of this as the lowest you can go. So now how do we move around? How do we know how to go forwards again? Well, we don't know what's in our directories, right? So we're sitting in this slash folder, and how do we look around? So there's a command called ls that lists everything that's in the folder. So if we say ls, we kind of see this color coordinated here. And the color coordination, it just depends on if it's a folder, if the folder's read-write, there's permission settings, which we're going to get into later. But the majority of these here are folders. Okay, well, we know we just came out of root, so we can go back into root. Now, how do we do that? So we can say change directory root, and we can actually hit tab to autocomplete. I don't know if you caught that, but there's no R any folder besides root. So at R, I can just hit tab, and it should type it out for me. Oh, I lied. There is a run in here somewhere, but it's hidden. We're going to cover that soon as well. So RO, hit tab, autocomplete, can change directory into root. So let's ls in root and see what's in here. Okay, this is more like our home folder, right? So we've got desktop, documents, downloads. This is kind of what applies to the root user. So what if we're sitting in this root folder here and we wanted to access instead this Etsy folder? Well, could we do the same Etsy command here? Well, I'm hitting tab and nothing's happening. Well, because Etsy doesn't belong in this area, right? But if we put a / in front of it, because this is the base, and then we hit Etsy there, now we can navigate to the Etsy folder. And we can actually double tab and see what's all in the Etsy folder, like an ls, say no. Another way to do that is if we wanted to ls what's in the Etsy folder without navigating to it, we could just type ls Etsy, and you can see everything that's in here. So there's some tricks that we can do, right? So we don't have to actually navigate to the folder to know what's in there. Again, if we ls and we want to know what's sitting in videos, or even let's say what's sitting in desktop for our folder. Well, if we start typing desktop and hit tab, we can't do that either, because everything in Linux is case sensitive. So if we start typing desktop and then hit tab now, we can ls and see what's in there. So our VMware came with a couple of shell scripts here that are automatically placed on our desktop. If we wanted to confirm that, you could see that they're both right here. So as of right now, we are just sitting in our root home folder, and we know how to navigate around. So if we wanted to go to desktop, we could hit ls now and see what's in there. If we wanted to go backwards, we could. Okay, now we're back in our root folder, and you can also tell where you're at. Your present working directory sits right here, right? So this little tilde is actually your home folder, and you can see that we're in desktop. So if we wanted to go back into our desktop, instead of typing, say you wanted to go to music from your desktop, instead of going root music, which will work, you could also just say, I want to go music. And that'll put you there as well. And notice you don't need the leading / when you use the tilde. So just some couple interesting tricks that you'll kind of pick up along the way. Tab is definitely going to be your best friend. If you run into something with multiple options, say you're trying to CD and you say, I want to go to my desktop, and you're tabbing and it's not working, you can hit double tab, and then it'll show you, okay, well, there's desktop, documents, downloads. Those are your three options that start with a D. So now you kind of have an idea as to how to kind of move around, but let's do a little bit more. So what if we want to make our own folder? Well, there's something called make directory, mkdir. So if we say make directory, we'll say, I'm just going to use my name, Heath. So now if we ls, we can see that this Heath folder is now here. We can go into the Heath folder, and there should be nothing in it, right? So we can go back, and we can also get rid of the Heath folder. Remove directory Heath. If we ls again, it's gone. So now, what else can we do? Well, we can also look for hidden folders. So we can say ls-la, and we can look for hidden files and folders here. Remember the color coordination. So this .cache, right? That in theory is a hidden folder. So if we say cd.cache, we can go into there. We ls, and there's actually some information in there. But when you saw it originally, you didn't see that. We're going to cover more on this. I just kind of wanted to show you that trick. As you see over on the left side, there's file permissions and properties. So be aware that just because it looks like something's not there doesn't mean it's not there. It might just actually be hidden, similar to Windows where you have hidden files and folders. So just a quick trick to show you that. So another thing we can do. So let's go back. And don't worry about what I'm doing here. You're going to cover these commands in a little bit. I'm just going to echo hi, and we're going to put that in a test.txt folder. So now if we ls, you can see that test.txt is here. So if we want to actually copy this file, we can copy this file to another location. So we can say, hey, I've got this test.txt, but I actually want to move it to downloads. And if we go ls to downloads, you could see that test.txt is actually sitting in there. And if we wanted to remove it, we can just say remove from downloads, or test.txt. Actually, sorry, remove downloads test.txt. We don't even have to transition into that directory if we don't want to. So another trick, say we want to see now that it's gone, and we want to ls, but we don't want to keep typing this out. If you hit the up arrow, now you can just see your old commands. So if you keep typing a command over and over, you can see what's going on. So ls shows that there's nothing in downloads now. We were able to successfully remove that file. So another thing that we can do is we can actually move. So say we wanted to move test.txt, and we wanted to put that into downloads. Okay, now if we ls, test.txt is now gone from this folder because we've moved it. We haven't made a copy, we've actually physically moved it away. So now if we ls, actually let's just tab up, you can see that test.txt is now in there. And I'm going to remove that here. Okay, and now the last thing I want to show you is the locate feature. So if we wanted to locate a file, say I wanted to locate bash, let's see. So we're looking for a file, and we're going to get more specific along the way, but if you type in locate, you can kind of look through a system to see if you can find it. Now I'm looking for, say, any type of bin bash or bin bash. That's fine, that's really what I wanted, but it shows you everything with bash in it. Now this might not work right away. What you might need to do is update the database. So you type in update db, it updates everything for you, and then you can use locate again. So it has to build that database of the information that it's finding in order to locate what you're searching for. So make sure that you use update db sort of frequently. Okay, so two more things I want to show you, and then we'll close out this video and move on to the next one. So an important thing you want to do with your new account is we're using a default password, and that's not very secure. So to change a password for our user, we can just type in PASSWD, and now it's going to ask us for a new password. So instead of using Tor, we can use something else. I'm going to type in the very secure password as my password for an example here. But if you plan on using this machine for future reference, you can type in a secure password and kind of keep it. So lastly, I wanted to show you is something called man. So man pages. Man pages are your instructions for any command that you're running. Most commands come with a man page. So let's say we want to look at ls. We can say man ls. And then it's going to give us all this information here about ls. So if you see, it says ls is list directory contents. Awesome. And then it gives you what options we can do. Well, we can do a -a for all, which you saw earlier. And you can kind of scroll through here and just see exactly what it has to offer. And that's kind of it. So when you go through here, you can kind of, if you're struggling to, there's a command in there, but you're not sure exactly what the command is, you can type in man and search it. And sometimes you can do ls, I don't know if this is going to work, but -- help. and you get some information as well. It doesn't provide you the full man pages, but it provides you something pretty close. So that's kind of just your way around if you ever get stuck, something to look for. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. Next, we're going to move on to users and privileges, how to add users, and how to change some sudos and some modifications to our file permissions. Okay, so now we're going to cover users and privileges. So in the last video, we touched a little bit on privileges with our ls-la, and we touched a little bit on users by changing the password of our root account. So now we'll cover a few more commands regarding those. So if we look again at ls-la, you could see all this crazy jumbled wordage over here, right? So it actually means something. So we look at the first line here. If we see a dash like this, a hyphen, that means it's a file. If we see a D, that means it's actually a directory. And then you see R, W, and X. So R, W, and X actually means read, write, execute. It's the permission settings that this particular group has. Now there are three groups here. There's the first, second, and then your third right here, right? So your first group right here is the owner of the file. So it looks like the owner of the file has full read-write execution, right? And then the next set of three here is actually the permissions for the members of the group that own the file. So this is a group ownership as opposed to actual ownership here. So for the people that are in the group that has access to this file, they can only read and execute. They can't write to it. Now, for the last one, this is just all of their users. So any common user here can actually just read and execute. They can't write the document. So that comes into play, especially when we get into penetration testing, because with penetration testing, we're looking to have full access, right? So we're always going to be looking for that folder that has full read-write. Typically, if we look at temp, that's our temp folder a lot of times. You see the temp folder has full read, write, execute. So when we're doing penetration testing, we're trying to upload some sort of exploit, we might actually upload it into the temp folder because that's where we can execute those files. However, we could also be looking for other full read, write, execute files where we need to modify them and give us root access to a system. So it's all about insecure configurations, and we're going to cover that more once we get into the actual penetration testing part of the course. So for the Linux Essentials part of the course, all we need to worry about is these file permissions. Another important feature of that is if we were to create a script, our script's not going to be able to run until it has full access. So how do we change access here? So let's make a file. I'm just going to make... we'll just echo another text document, right? So we'll just say hello, and actually I typed that in backwards. So hello, and we'll call it hello.text. So if we ls here, by default, we only have read write, and then read access for everybody else. Meaning if we wanted to read it, we could say cat, which we're going to get into later, cat hello.text. It just says hello. So what can we do here? Well, we can use something called change mode. In changing mode is chmod, and we have a couple options here. So we can do a plus, right? And we could say, well, we want read, write, execute, or we just want execute. But another way I like doing it is you have a number feature. So the one you really need to know is all sevens. Sevens gives you full read-write access across the board. So if we say chmod 777 hello.text, now we ls la. And you notice that hello.text turns green. That means it is full read-write. And here you go. We've got the dash here saying it's a file, and we've got read, write, execute across the board. So this is how we change file permissions. You don't need to necessarily know about the other numbers in terms of penetration testing. It becomes more in terms of configuration and security management of files if you were to get down that path. So to stay on the easiest path, just remember 777 or +X will work as well. So changing the mode is critical, and we're going to cover it time and time again throughout the course once we get a little bit deeper. So a couple more things we need to talk about. Say we wanted to add a new user. Well, there's a feature called add user. So we say add user, and 1 or 2 names is allowed. So we need to add user, say John. Okay, so it made something for John. Let's give him a password. Give him a password again, and we'll just hit enter for the defaults. It's all correct. Okay, so we now have a user named John, and we can confirm that. We can actually cat the etc password file here, and you see down at the very bottom we have this user John. So this etc password file you're going to become very familiar with because it shows you all the users. Now there's a lot of times where you're doing penetration testing, you're going to have access to this etc password file because it doesn't provide the password anymore. It used to a long time ago. Passwords are now in the shadow file, so you actually have a little bit of access and information disclosure here at the hands of poor configuration. So you see that I've created a user John. Well, that gives us a little bit of information. Say there's SSH on a machine or something else, we can use that username of John to try to break into the machine. So we'll cover that again later. But if we wanted to see what the etc shadow file looks like, now we come in here and you've got these jumbled stuff here, right? So it's just a hashing format. So what we're doing is we can actually use a tool like Hashcat to break this down and crack these passwords. Now, a password will be very easy. But just know that if you have access to the etc shadow file, you have a good chance of cracking a password, depending on your capabilities and depending on the strength of the password, that'll allow you access to a machine. So something to think about there. Okay, so now we have our user John. Let's go ahead and switch to him. So we can use something called SU, which stands for switch user, and we'll say switch user John. Okay, so it automatically gave us John here. Let's see if we could switch back to root. Okay, we can't just switch back to root because we need root's password, right? So we can type in password and that works. But if we didn't know the password, then we'd be stuck on John. We were able to access John because we were already root. So this comes into play in terms of users. Let's go back to John here. Now, if you're a user, you have to be able to do certain things. You need permission to do certain things, I should say, right? So root has full access and permission to do everything. But John, we just created John. John doesn't have any sort of access. So if we wanted to change the password, say we want to change the password for root, I can't modify the password information because I don't have that kind of access. Now there is something called a sudo, which would provide John that access if we gave it to him. So it's called a sudoers file, and basically anybody in that sudoers file can change permissions given if they are a sudo user, right? So we would type in sudo password root, and it's going to ask for the password for John, but you're going to notice, hey, John's not in the sudoers file. John can't do this. So John has base permissions, right? And we're going to counter that a lot of times in penetration testing, where if we get in, we'll get something called lower privilege, and we'll get an account like John, and we're going to try to escalate into root, but we just can't do it. You know, the chances of doing that and having a John in a sudoers file is just not high. It's possible, but it's not likely. So for now, just know that if you want a user other than root to have access to file permissions, you need to have them in the sudoers file. That becomes useful too in penetration testing because you can look at the sudoers file if you have access to see what users have sudo privileges. Okay, so that is it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to be covering network commands and moving on gradually towards scripting. So let's go ahead and get there, and I will see you when we get over there.
Okay, so now let's cover network commands. So the first command I want to cover is ifconfig. So you may be familiar with the Windows version of this, which is ipconfig, and they pretty much do the same thing. So it shows you here your different interface types and the IP address associated with them. So ETH0 here, Ethernet 0, has an IP address of 192.168.132.164. You can see the net mask, the broadcast address, and you can see the MAC address as well. And we also have a loopback address here. Now, if your machine has a wireless adapter, or at some point you want to do wireless penetration testing, you're going to need iwconfig. And you should not expect to see anything on this at the moment unless you're using a laptop. Then you actually might see a configuration down here for it. If you would see something under iwconfig, you would see like a WLAN 1, WLAN 0, something along those lines. Okay, and another common command that we're going to see is going to be the ping command. So we can just type in ping and the address that we're trying to talk to. So for example, I'm going to try to ping my home router, and I get talking back. So if I tried to ping something that wasn't in my network, like a 16.1, you're going to see the results change. So with ping here, ping is going to be endless. Until we hit something like Control-C to stop it, it'll ping forever. So I'm going to hit Control-C again and kind of show you the difference. So you see that we attempted to ping here, and we got replies, we got information back. Well, that's good. That means we're talking to the other machine. It says, hey, are you there? It says, yeah, I'm there. And we try to ping this machine here, but this machine's not talking back. It could mean that the machine is not on the network, or that the machine is just blocking ICMP traffic. ICMP is another word for ping. So moving on to the next command, I want to show you ARP. So the best way I like to type in is ARP with a switch of A. And ARP is just going to show you MAC addresses that it talks to and the IP address. Actually, I said that backwards. It's going to show you the IP address it talks to and the MAC address associated with it. So if an IP address reaches out, say 192.168.15.1 talked out to this machine, it's going to say, okay, hey, who are you? It's going to send a broadcast message out to say, who has this IP address? And then the IP address will respond and says, hey, I do, and this is my MAC address. So ARP is just a way of associating IP addresses with MAC addresses. And once you know that, you can also look at netstat. So netstat-ano is another one of my favorite commands. And this shows you just the active connections that are running on your machine. So if we scroll way up, and you can just kind of see what's open and what's talking here. Where this really comes in handy on a penetration test is to see if a machine is talking to somebody else. Same thing with ARP. You want to know what that machine is associated with, and is it talking to something on a port. So this is more just internal right now, but it's still good to know. So for example, if I were to open up a Firefox page and connect out to the internet, then I went and I did a netstat again, I would see information about that port being open and that I am going out with it. So just kind of keep that in mind. These are not commands that you really need to know in depth right now. Networking does come into play when you are doing penetration testing, but we're going to cover these commands time and time and again. I just wanted to give you a very brief introduction to them. Okay, and the last command that I have for you today is route. So if you type in route, that's going to print your routing table. And the routing table is important because it tells you where your traffic exits, essentially. So for this VM, my traffic is exiting on 192.168.134.0. So any traffic goes out of this 0.0.0.0 gateway in this range, right? So when it goes out this gateway, it's doing NAT, so network address translation, and it's running off my computer. So the best examples aren't here, but it's important to know route as well, because there could be a machine that you're attacking that has multiple routes. So you might see a 134 and a 135 because it has a dual home NIC, meaning it has two NICs inside of it. So it's actually talking to a completely different network that you didn't know existed. So you might have been attacking one network in the 134 range, and then 135 is just out there, and this computer can talk to both. And until that point, you had no idea. And that's the idea of called pivoting, when you switch a network from one to the other, but you're using a machine. So that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about viewing, creating, and editing files.
So in the last video, we took a look at different networking commands. In this video, I want to show you some updates to those commands. Now, we were running IP or ifconfig, so we were doing ifconfig, and that works, and that's fine, although it is becoming deprecated. So it is still my go-to, if I'm being honest with you, because I like to stay old school, but I do need to show you the new and improved version of ifconfig. So if we take a look, I'm just going to clear my screen here. So the command is IP. Now we can say IPA, and we can look at that, and that says IP address. And what do we get here? Well, we get our loopback, and we get our Ethernet, and we still get to see what our IP address is. We get to see what our subnet mask is here as well. We get to see our broadcast address. So there's a lot of information here that is provided, which is good. We can also take a look at some of the stuff that I was showing you before. So say we want to look at the ARP table, we can say IPN, which stands for neighbor. Let me clear this. And here's our ARP table. Okay, so very similar. And we want to look at routing tables, we can just do IPR. So instead of having to remember, okay, ARP, or we're having to look at route, okay, we can do all of this through one command, which is the IP command. So I just wanted to add this updated video to kind of show you that there is this command out there. This is where the industry is moving. This is something that you should know, but it is perfectly fine in my book if you still want to use ifconfig. Nothing wrong with ifconfig, nothing wrong with using IPA. Both are fine. Okay, so just another command for your repertoire and for your tool belt, and something to keep in your back pocket. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next video. All right, so second to last video here in our Linux series, and this one is a very important one. So we're going to cover a few things. I want to cover how to install files, how to install updates, and how to get files from GitHub. All these are going to be very important and things that you're going to encounter as a pen tester all the time. So from a Linux perspective, let's say that you want to update your system and you're in the terminal. Well, what you can do is you can say something along the lines of apt update, and we'll say also apt upgrade when you're done with that. So what this is going to do is this is going to go out, and you can see these archive.linux. I'll scroll back up here. And all these tools need to be installed, but this archive.linux.edu, so this is what's called a repository. So we're going out to these repositories and we're saying, hey, what's been updated lately and what do we need to download? And you can see, okay, these packages that are automatically installed, no longer required. We can auto remove them if we need to. And then we have all these new packages that need to be installed. If you look through the list, it's quite a bit. And then we've got the packages that'll also be upgraded through here as well. So we have all these updates, upgrades, etc. If we want to perform this, it's going to take up 871 megabytes of additional disk space, and it will probably take a little bit of time to download, upgrade, etc. So if you want to do this, go ahead and push your update. You absolutely don't have to be successful in the course, but just to provide clarification and understanding of how it's done and what it's doing, just wanted to point that out. Now, let's say we just wanted a tool, a specific tool. You see all these things in here. A lot of them are related to like Python, which is interesting because I do want to install a Python tool. So let's install a tool called pip. So what we're going to do is we're going to say apt install, And then the tool is called pip, but it is python-pip like this. So type that in, hit enter, and it's going to go check for it. It's going to look for it, and it found it, which is great. If it weren't to find it, it would say something a little different. We can show you, like say, just hit some numbers in there. Say unable to locate that package. So you'll know you're on the right track with the package name here. So I'm going to go ahead and actually hit yes to install this. It's going to go out and download everything we need for pip. And you're going to see why pip is important here. So there is pip and there's pip3. Now both of those go out and do some installs for us. And we're going to go ahead and just say yes. And those installs are related to Python. So we're going to use a lot of tools in this course that are related to Python. And it's going to install those tools for us. So pip is for Python, pip3 is for Python 3. Now Python 3 is the latest and greatest. Python 2 is actually being deprecated in 2020 or end of service in 2020. So a lot of things are actually moving away from that now. So when we get into the Python section of the course, we're actually going to be working completely in Python 3 for this reason solely. So while we wait for this, let's go ahead and go out to the interwebs. And I'm just going to go to applications up here and then Firefox terminal. So from here, as an update to the course, I want to introduce a tool and teach you also how to install a tool. So this is kind of serving two purposes here. So I want to go out to Google, and what we're going to do is we're going to look for a tool called Pimp My Kali, P-I-M.